my next guest. He's the Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at University of Oxford, Professor Carl Heneghan. I'm delighted to say joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
You are among the people who, along with a bunch of no-mark journalists like myself, and also some incredibly eminent experts and scientists in their fields and academics like yourself and others, have been called variously by lockdown skeptics, lockdown deniers, COVID skeptics, and even COVID deniers. Your name is on a list of people who have been accused of spouting disinformation, a website which is being promoted and set up by Neil O'Brien, a Conservative MP, among others, who is actually a member of the government in the Justice Department. What do you make of people, particularly elected MPs and government, calling you a COVID denier?
Yeah, well, one of the things about being an MP is that as a person who votes for MPs, I thought it was our job to hold them to account. But it seems to be now coming the other way around. And I think this is now a problem we have in society, is that we can't tolerate debate. Everybody will know there are two sides to a story. But when you lose one of those sides, you've got a problem. It means we're lacking confidence. It means when coming forward, actually you don't want to hear the other side. And look, right now, you've just had Mark Dreyford saying we're going to go back to schools. Children have had a torrid time. I think that's a valid point. But we see the other side of the argument says, no, we need to keep schools locked down. What's happening here is a number of people who want to come into the academic space are being marked out. They're not being talked to or debated. I'm quite happy to discuss with Neil O'Brien some of the issues where he thinks we may have got some of the things wrong. But I actually don't think we've got things wrong. It's a matter of interpretation. Looking at diagnostics, for instance. I've been doing this for 25 years. Suddenly overnight, I haven't lost my marbles and suddenly gone back in time and say, I don't know what I'm on about. But I would like to have debates with these people to say, where is the misunderstanding? Where can we clear these issues up?
And this is the issue, isn't it? Because people like you, Professor Sunetra Gupta and others who have put their heads above the parapet and, I would have said, in a very uncontroversial way, questioned things about, I mean, there's been some debate over PCR tests, reliability. There's been some debates over just how deaths are counted, whether, in fact, an intervention you made over the summer actually led to Public Health England changing the way that they counted COVID deaths in this country. But the sort of the name calling and the insults, that has actually that's not just personally very difficult to deal with for people who are not part of the cut and thrust of political media debate. That's also actually stifling scientific debates and questioning and people coming forward, because you are not alone in your position and the questions that you are raising. A lot of it's questions rather than downright, saying this or that is wrong. But you've been speaking to a lot of other academics who are also very concerned.
Look, in the background, there are clinicians, people in the NHS, a swathe of academics who are out there who are too scared to come forward. And that concerns me about our society. What do we think we're achieving if we can't get the truth out there, if we can't get people's points of view out there? What seems to happen is, as well, over the course of this pandemic, people will have made mistakes, will have had an error. And what happens is somebody picks that error out and tries to then say, because you made one error, therefore everything you now say will be mistaken or a problem. That is actually a problem within the individuals themselves trying to make that point. You have to tolerate some uncertainty. You have to tolerate throughout a fast-moving pandemic, people make mistakes. But what we should not be tolerating now is an attack on freedom of speech, and we should be seriously, seriously concerned about the way academics are being silenced in this debate.
Well, indeed, you actually still work as a professional medic. I believe you were working over Christmas dealing with patients. And I've spoken in the last week to a doctor who works as a consultant in ICU in a major hospital, and said that if he spoke out to me publicly, he would basically lose his job. He'd been told twice now and formally disciplined for speaking out. And if he spoke a third time, he would be disciplined. And yet I see doctors and medics and scientists speaking out constantly. But you're only allowed to speak out if you say one thing. So the public often, we're told everyone thinks this apart from some rogue people like, say, Carl Heneghan or Sunetra Gupta or others. and everyone else thinks the same. But you're saying that actually behind the scenes, that is not the case. There is a lot more scientific debate going on about how to handle this pandemic.
Yeah, there's huge scientific debate at high academic levels about the uncertainties. At clinical levels, there are lots of people asking questions about what's going on. You allude to a point over Christmas, Boxing Day. I work as an urgent care general practitioner. I do home visits. I go into care homes. And that's the job I do. And I do quite a few shifts over Christmas. So people have said, where have you gone? I'm actually doing my job. But that job entails a different aspect to the academic world. But it allows me to go in and see what's happening on the ground. And I have to say, I'm heartbroken by what's happened on care homes. I asked in September, nobody's wrote about this, for a new minister on care homes because we have a specific problem where a third of all deaths have occurred. There's been over 5,000 outbreaks since the first day of September in care homes. And yet, when I see in December, we're starting to do a programme of letting people back into care homes just at the time when we shouldn't. We should have been doing that in summer. But the arguments get lost because somehow it's about a very simple procedure. If we'd have locked down for 2 weeks, everything would have been okay. I'm sorry, I have to question them issues. There are many that do. But also it's validating the information when I look at the data sheets with what's happening on the ground. And that's an important aspect. And we haven't improved care homes in all of this time. And I'm speaking out now because these are the issues we have to debate. And the thing I think we have to really debate right now is education and our children. And I'm with the Minister from Wales. They've had a torrid time. And we're looking at inequalities here that are so bad that we're seeing children fall behind in the lowest groups, if you like, attainment groups, 7 to 9 months behind some of their peers because they don't have access to laptops. They don't have access to the technology. And yet we're talking about some people about keeping them out of school for the rest of the year. I disagree with that. And we have to have a voice for people to air those views.
And yet we know that an awful lot of the public agree with, lockdowns that last for months on end, that they, in fact, many would argue, as I would, that actually it is the public opinion rather than the science that is driving this government policy these days. But that the people, are terrified of their children going back to school. Some people, they think schools shouldn't be open. They think that people should be locked up in their homes unless or until we have almost, no deaths from COVID at all. Why do you think so many people support those policies then?
Well, look, my job is to inform the debate, try and provide the evidence that can inform the debate. Ultimately, the public decides what should happen, and our ministers decide what should happen. But what's happened over the 9 months now is we've been fed a message of fear, and people are highly anxious within that message. There will come a time when some of this fear will dissipate, but what we have to be thinking about is all the problems that we're storing up. This is a difficult decision when to open up, when to let schools back, but you've got to look at the benefits of staying in lockdown versus the harms that you're storing up. And if you ignore the harms, you cannot make an informed choice.
Did you ever, when you became Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at one of the greatest universities in the world, did you ever think that what you did for a living and you speaking publicly about it would ever become so controversial and earn you such sometimes hatred and abuse?
It's a difficult one, Julie, because I think when you go into certain areas and you try and produce an evidence approach, what you see is very polarized opinions on what should happen next. The job of evidence is to reduce that uncertainty, but actually does lead to lots of problems. There's been many areas we've worked in where we've tried to do that. In the last pandemic, for instance, we spent 4.5 years working on the evidence on Tamiflu, looking at the evidence to say, does it work? It was highly controversial when the results came out in 2014. Because it went against the grain of this is a drug that makes a real difference. Was in the Science Tech Committee. Believe it or not, spoke to Patrick Vallance, who worked for GSK at the time, and released all the data to us. And it was controversial. What I think is different now is the social media aspect and the 24/7 news. The 140 characters, that means you can assassinate somebody very quickly. What we need to do is somehow dial that back and think emotionally about what are we trying to achieve when we attack somebody, as opposed to the only answer is to put the facts out there and the evidence out there.
Carl Hennigan, I know my listeners are just so grateful to you for your bravery and heroism. And again, there are so many people who you are speaking on behalf of, because so many of your academic and medical colleagues are frankly too scared to lose their jobs, too scared to speak out for the abuse they get. And I, for one, on behalf of my listeners, want to thank you for all that you have done. And whoever turns out to be right or wrong, let's at least make our decisions based on the science that is backed up by the evidence. Carl Hennigan, Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford, thank you for joining us. 8:18 is the time.